Welcome to JK Tells a Story, where real-life dramas unfold. Sit back and enjoy today's tale. My name is Marcus Blackwell, and I was returning home after a successful business trip to my old hometown of Youngstown, Ohio. This was the first business trip back in 3 years, since my divorce and final departure from that Rust Belt town. That night at my favorite bar, the Steelworkers Tap, I watched the Cleveland Browns game, drank beer, and laughed with a few remaining true friends from home. For the first time in a long while, it was genuinely fun. The only low point of the reunion came when my ex-wife showed up for her shift. Vanessa had started working as a night bartender 3 years ago, right after I left town. She'd caused quite a stir back then with a long series of casual affairs and infidelities with numerous men. She got pregnant by one of them and tried to hold me responsible for the child. Vanessa lied to everyone, claiming that I refused to acknowledge my own kid, defaming me so thoroughly that people who had known me as an honest and decent guy all my life began to avoid, humiliate, and insult me. Even my stepmother turned against me. Apart from a few close friends who knew the truth, most of Youngstown's residents literally slandered me and forced me to leave town to save my business, my sanity, my freedom, and to restore my self-esteem. My divorce, filed under irreconcilable differences, was relatively quiet. No real reasons or circumstances were disclosed publicly, such as her long-term affair with a steroid user named Derek Morrison. However, Derek Bull Morrison was too much of a braggart. When his wife Christine found out that he was the one who got my wife pregnant, she divorced him and took everything, their house, their car, and received significant alimony and child support for the only healthy child she'd born with him. Her father fired Derek from his high-paying sales manager position. Now he cleaned restrooms in nursing homes at the federal minimum hourly rate. In an attempt to protect himself during his divorce, Derek named several other married men who'd been with him and my wife at their weekly parties. This ruined his reputation and provoked several other divorces. To deflect attention from themselves, most of the husbands who'd slept with my wife also named others who had done the same, causing a cascade of lawsuits. The county family court was flooded with divorce cases, alienation of affection claims, and STD lawsuits. The state had to send a visiting circuit judge to help clear out the calendar. After 2 years of legal confusion, the ugly truth became public knowledge. The only person in town who wasn't guilty or embarrassed by his actions was me, and I was the one who'd been driven out. The same townspeople who'd forced me to leave were now blushing with shame because they'd driven out an innocent man. It might help you understand why I didn't take the military route at the time. I realized that I would be seen as a weakling for not fighting for my wife. But let's look at the situation and my options. Should I have chosen one of the dozens of men she slept with to be the sole representative of the entire group and contented myself with simply beating him up? How was I supposed to choose just one of them? The biggest, the one on steroids, the first, the last, the longest lasting? Should I toss a coin? Should I let the rest go unpunished, or should I take on all of them? One at a time or all at once? Perhaps I could have invited everyone into one building, then blown it up and spent the rest of my life on the run as #1 on the FBI's most wanted list. Oops, I missed one. Should I go back and finish the job? Damn, here's another one. And if I killed them all and restored my honor, whatever that means, what would I gain? I was a fairly normal kid who grew up and had my share of fights. But my experiences in military operations in the Middle East changed my perception of things. The guys I fought with in special operations taught me that it's better to live and fight another day than to fight a battle that will be lost, or worse, one that was already lost before it even started. Throughout history, guerrillas have never lost a war. Following their victorious example, I found that I could dictate the terms, place, and time of a future battle after I had time to mine the battlefield, cut their supply lines, and limit their tactical options. I learned my lesson well. I was given a nickname, the Phantom, and had $1 million bounty on my head, dead or alive. Having survived that war, I'm not afraid, not worried, and not angry. I just focus on solving the problem at hand. Once I decide to take action, I plan, prepare, and execute without passion or regret, with strict attention to detail. When I report mission accomplished, it means completed forever, unless God starts the world over again. I hadn't gone this route with my ex yet. When Vanessa and I broke up the way we did, there was no point in fighting for her. That battle was already lost, and all I had to do was climb out of the infected pit and put my life back together. And I did. That doesn't mean I didn't feel the blows to my male ego. The pain in my heart hurt like hell. But my new life was full and good, and I didn't need or want to deal with her again. That changed when I saw that she was now targeting my good friend Sam Fletcher, the bar owner. I knew that countless others would follow, some of them with families. It made me reconsider my decision to leave things with her in the past. Not just that. The mirrors through which Vanessa looked at me that evening worked both ways. My gaze was on her as she took money for drinks and put it in her pocket without registering it in the cash register. She also overcharged new customers and pocketed that money. When she checked her drawer at the end of the night, I saw her blatant theft. On the flight home in my corporate jet, I reflected on the situation. Vanessa wouldn't stop hurting good people. Sam was one of my few true friends left, and his problem was now my problem. It would soon become her problem too. The only questions I had were, who, how many, and how to do it so that she didn't expect it and never repeated these tricks again. During the week I spent in Youngstown, I learned a lot of gossip about so-called friends and others who'd slept with my wife. None of them looked good. I even found myself face to face with the man who'd been her last and longest lover during our marriage. He was now 3 times the size of the 98-pound weakling he'd been back then. Derek had been a skinny guy with a concave chest, like the before picture in those How to Become He-Man ads on the back of Action Comics when I was a kid. You'd send in $1 or $2 and receive a brochure on exercise or martial arts. He reminded me of that little rooster from the Foghorn Leghorn cartoons. Lots of bravado and nothing to back it up. I remember when this fool started using steroids heavily so he could skip the exercises and go straight to being He-Man. His steroid rage preceded his muscle building. Only a kick to the back of my knees and then being tackled by a 280-pound Kansas City Chiefs linebacker on a concrete tile floor stopped me from tearing this tiny, furious guy to pieces when Vanessa threw him in my face in front of my friends. My knee still hurts when the weather changes. Since then, the steroid user has vastly outperformed even the after picture in those He-Man commercials. At only 5'7", he now weighed over 300 pounds. His chemical muscles had turned into reddish cheeks, a grotesque jelly belly soaking his baby Huey t-shirt with sweat, huge flabby legs, and dirty pajama pants that smelled of urine. His feet were swollen and bare in slippers. He claimed he'd stopped using steroids because they destroyed his heart. But despite barely being able to lift his thick arm and beer mug with his remaining 98 pounds of muscle, he still wasn't done with his bragging. To quote him, "I left your wife when she told me she got pregnant from me." It was all about his need to feel like an alpha male, a false, pathetic dream. What he and others did to my marriage was bad enough. Him shoving it in my face again caused the Phantom's instincts to rise once more for the first time in 15 years after leaving service. He was now number 2 on my list, facing very difficult retribution. I knew his ex-wife, Christine, from the time of my divorce. She was listed in the phone book, so I called her and told her that I just met her ex and what he had said. She invited me to her apartment. We talked for hours about Derek and Vanessa and the hell they'd put us through. As the evening wore on and the whiskey bottle emptied, Christine started sharing her own secrets. "Nobody knows this," she confided, "but Derek isn't actually the father of my first child. At my wedding reception, I was with someone else, and I let Derek think the baby was his. He's been so proud of himself all these years." She paused, then looked at me directly. "I've been thinking, I'm ready to have another child, and now would be the perfect time." What happened that night doesn't need detailed description. What mattered was the plan. If Christine became pregnant, Derek would be listed as the father and forced to pay child support for a child that wasn't his, the same way he tried to trap me through Vanessa. At the end of our conversation, I asked if she'd also like to help me with payback against Vanessa. She smiled and said, "What do you have in mind?" I explained my broader plan, a trap that would remove Vanessa from circulation for a very long time without any violence or illegality that could be traced back to either of us. Christine loved it. We shook hands on the deal, and I left with her promise to do exactly as I instructed and to keep our arrangement completely secret. As for the other men who'd slept with my wife, the bachelors and divorced men who'd escaped the family court chaos relatively unscathed, I'd already dealt with them through other means. Over the preceding months, I'd quietly bought up their debts for pennies on the dollar. Home mortgages, car loans, business loans, unpaid contractor bills. I'd set legal mechanisms in motion that would grind them down slowly but thoroughly. That side of the ledger was being settled. Now it was time to turn my full attention to Vanessa herself. Meanwhile, I noticed that Vanessa had increased her theft from Sam's bar. I called him and told him about what I'd observed. I didn't let him in on the entire plan. I didn't want her to be fired immediately, but I hinted that she would be leaving town soon and would probably need money. It'll take 90 days to get a passport, which she'll need. I told him cryptically, just be patient. Sam was my only remaining friend who knew about my military background, and his reaction indicated he understood this was a mission of sorts. He had a family to feed and a business to protect, so it was his decision how to handle it. But he trusted me. The next morning, I started working on the trap. First, I needed to create an irresistible lure. Vanessa had never traveled more than a few miles from Youngstown in her entire life. She'd always talked about wanting to see the world but never had the money or opportunity. I would give her that opportunity, or so she'd think. Considering the cost of flights and logistics at the time, the port of departure had to be at least 5,000 miles from the United States. Far enough that she couldn't simply return home with whatever money she could steal from Sam or save. Given the distance requirements, I went to the library for detailed maps, color photographs, and basic information about the west coast of South America. It was ideal in terms of distance and terrain. The jungle, vast areas with various security concerns, border disputes, and recent incidents made it a perfect trap. Of several suitable ports on the west coast of South America, I quickly chose Valparaiso, a versatile port city far down the Chilean coast. Valparaiso had everything I needed. It's served by the major airport of Santiago. Chile's primary language is Spanish, and customs regulations are straightforward. Americans don't even need a visa to enter Chile for up to 6 months. It's also a beautiful city with stunning views, which would make it a credible starting point for a luxury cruise. Valparaiso is built on the winding hills of the Andes, with brightly colored houses lining cobblestone streets. Tourist attractions within reach include the world's driest desert and its amazing Valley of the Moon, Incan ruins, breathtaking landscapes of glaciers and fjords, hot springs, volcanoes that form part of the Pacific Ring of Fire, and incredible 8,000-foot vertical cliffs. Photos from the Chilean tourist office would be perfect additions to any prize package. But here's what made it ideal as a trap. It was easy to get her in and impossible for her to get out on her own. The only viable means of travel north from Chile were air and sea, and she could afford neither after losing her money. Chile extends approximately 2,500 miles south to the very tip of South America and Antarctica. No escape route there. Heading east would mean crossing the 22,000-foot Andes Mountains and then 750 miles across the Argentine Pampas to Buenos Aires, which wouldn't bring her any closer to home. Going north would mean passing through a dozen countries, many with unstable regions, from Chile to the U.S. border. She'd face countless border crossings and checkpoints, with no visas to travel through these areas. A northward retreat of 7,000 miles overland from South America to North America would be impossible for a lone American woman, even for a special operations soldier with full weapons and support. Thank God I'd never taught her any survival skills. If she chose to sail up the coast, halfway along the length of South America and all of Central America to San Diego, or to board some vessel, her only real choice would be to remain trapped wherever she ended up. After choosing Valparaiso as the port, my next task was to coordinate the schedules of cruise ships and cargo ships calling there, so I'd have enough time to organize everything. I worked through travel agencies to identify 3 Pacific cruises that met my criteria. I tentatively chose the one I thought would most appeal to Vanessa, a cruise that offered what looked like a lifelong dream translated into a 6-month, all-expenses-paid vacation. The itinerary showed it would stop in Valparaiso about 9 months from the planning date. Like a bus on the sea, this cruise would stop at every tropical island and tourist hotspot from near Antarctica northward to the Arctic regions. My ex would need to pack everything from bikinis to snowmobile suits. It was perfect bait. But the real trap wasn't a cruise at all. It was a cargo ship, specifically, a small, independent freighter that operated in South American waters. Now my task was to find cargo ships that would fit my plans and negotiate with one of the captains. There are two types of cargo ships, corporate and vagrant. Corporate ships are large vessels operated by big companies under long-term contracts with many strict rules. They didn't fit my plan. Roaming cargo ships, owned by smaller companies and individuals, are smaller, much cheaper to operate, and governed solely by the laws of the sea. The captain's orders supersede all else. I needed one of those slow ships to China that operated wherever there was supply and demand, no matter how small the port. They might travel between two ports for years, or might not call at the same port twice in a decade. I called the Valparaiso Port Authority and asked them to fax me information on unincorporated cargo ships that had called there in the past year, names, dates, registrations, owners of record, contacts, everything. They sent me a list of 23 vessels with basic information to work with. Within 2 days, I'd located the cargo ship owners and contacted their offices to find out when their ships would return to Valparaiso. Using various methods, I was able to quickly narrow the list down to 4 ships. I obtained the names of the ships, their captains, their usual radio frequencies and call signs, and recent photographs. Their offices sent me mostly black and white photos of rusty, peeling, barnacle-encrusted hulls. If any of these floating coffins could build up enough steam to create a bow wave without exploding, no self-respecting dolphin or flying fish would surf it. An old army buddy with whom I sometimes stayed in touch had a ham radio station and often communicated with ships at sea around the world. I called him, explained what I needed to do, though not why, and that I didn't have much time. He told me to come to his house in Chicago, and we'd contact the ship's radio operators via Morse code. I needed to negotiate with one of the captains personally and privately, away from company oversight. My buddy and I spent an evening making contact with the 4 ships. Over the course of 2 weeks, I spoke to all 4 captains by phone from different ports as they made their rounds. The first was too drunk to understand what I was saying. The second didn't even want to consider it. He was actually a decent man, for a cargo ship captain. The other 2 captains were less scrupulous and showed their skills in negotiation, but one demanded too much and offered too little. I found that I could work with the 4th captain, and it seemed we could agree on acceptable terms. His name was Captain Rodriguez. Captain Rodriguez, I'm looking for a non-corporate ship that spends as little time in port as possible. I want my ex-wife to remain on your ship for a minimum of 3 years with no shore leave or communication with the outside world. Senor, he replied in accented English, I am the captain of one of 3 ships that sail the Pacific and Indian Oceans for a private owner who decides when and where our cargoes come and go. We often must anchor at sea for days until he finds us another cargo. We sail along the western shores of the 3 Americas, through Asia and India, and down through Africa. We have just returned from a shore vacation, and only God knows when we will have our next one. He paused, then continued, on the date you mention, we will be transporting a cargo of copper from Valparaiso to Seattle, where we will exchange it for iron destined for China. There we will load cheap electronics and other trade goods to return to the smaller markets of Central and South America. Perfect, I said. Captain, in exchange for bringing my ex-wife on board, I will give you a down payment to secure your agreement to our deal, another payment every year while she is on board, and a final amount when the deal is done and she has landed alive at any U.S. port we agree on. Your offer is very tempting, he said. If you can arrange for her to be ready to sail on the evening of the day I specified, that will work well. Then the captain raised an important issue. She is a working merchant ship, and the only way the authorities will allow a passenger to leave port on my ship is if she has able seaman papers. I will need to add her to the ship's crew list as a worker. However, I can prepare a set of Chilean documents for her before her arrival at the pier that will allow her to leave port with us. But I won't have time to bribe the necessary official and get his real signature. A forged signature could raise suspicions if we return to Chile frequently. I will keep her passport and documents locked in my safe until the end of our agreement, unless requested by officials. If the ship's papers are checked on our return to Valparaiso, she will be discovered. But fortunately, we only visit Chile 2 or 3 times a year, and they have only checked my documents twice in the last 10 years. He continued, in any port other than the United States, if she attempts to board another ship, the forgery will be detected, especially if she is unable to respond fluently to the port official or ship's officer in Spanish. I will make sure she remains on board. Okay, Captain, I said. Please use the value of the papers and bribes to take all the money she has before she boards your ship. She should have about $1,200. Don't let her hide it. Examine her and her luggage. If she can escape, she shouldn't have the money to do so. That money is yours, it's part of the deal. Keep it. You should also know, I added, that she can swim at least a mile, so keep an eye on her when land is in sight. If she sees the shore, she'll be overboard, even if there are sharks. When I described my ex-wife and her story, and sent him a very personal photo of her, I didn't need any more convincing. In fact, he talked me into letting him keep her for additional years of his choosing, without any additional payments from me. I agreed on the condition that it would be limited only to his fleet of ships, and that no matter what ship she was on, he would be personally responsible for bringing her back to the U.S. alive, or my plan would have no long-term value. We agreed on the terms. An advance payment, annual payments for the first 3 years from the date of her boarding the ship with false documents, and a final payment when she was landed on American soil at the end of her voyage. I immediately transferred the down payment to the account he provided. He would receive the first annual payment as soon as she was on board with documents in hand and the ship left the harbor, with the port clear and cargo loaded. The next phase required creating the fake cruise package that would lure Vanessa to Valparaiso. This couldn't look homemade or suspicious. It needed to appear completely legitimate, professional graphics, official-looking documents, the works. With 7 months left until the scheduled sailing date, I began working on the deception. I needed cover for the prize itself. I formed a new corporation using the identification of a young expatriate who'd recently died of natural causes in a foreign country, listed as the agent of record for the state of incorporation. While I was waiting for the corporate charter, I placed an ad in a major newspaper in a large city near Youngstown for a recent college graduate who could handle a lot of details without asking too many questions. With 6 months left, I found Sandra Wells. She had a 2.5 GPA and a recent bachelor's degree from a local community college, bright enough to handle the work, but not so credentialed that she'd ask uncomfortable questions. I figured my ex should be able to communicate with her easily, which would ease any concerns that might arise. We spoke on the phone first. Sandra, this job involves a lot of prep work for a new prank TV show, as well as a small part in a prank we're doing as a test for the studio. We'll be secretly taping the winner publicly, and we may also tape in your office, so you'll need to adopt and practice a stage name and a fake backstory. This job will only last about 9 months, but if you succeed, I'll give you an excellent recommendation. Who knows? This could be your path to hosting the edgy TV show that launches your career. I continued, the prize package will be sent to the target of our prank 90 days before the show moves to Chile for filming. If all goes well, your job will last about 3 months after the package is delivered, plus a week or 2 to close the local office. She agreed, and the next morning I flew out to meet her in person. We discussed the details over coffee, agreed on a very reasonable salary, far more than she'd make anywhere else with her qualifications, and I hired her as the only person I'd meet face-to-face during the operation. I never told her my real name or anything about my actual life or any TV program that might jeopardize the plan. While I was arranging things with Sandra, I also found out that Christine was pregnant. She told me she was going to name the baby after me if it was a boy, and list Derek as the father on the birth certificate. Good job, I told her. Let's see if he can shell out $600 for a DNA test and a few thousand more for paternity legal fees. If not, he'll have to pay to raise your child for the next 18 years. Christine smiled. That was exactly the kind of long-term payback she appreciated. Sandra opened a local bank account with a debit card in the name of a new corporation, using a deceased agent's taxpayer and Social Security identification numbers. She filed the articles of incorporation with a facsimile signature, and I transferred funds to get started from a numbered account. Ownership and control of these accounts were wrapped in a maze of legal corporations, LLCs, LLPs, and blind trusts in which both I and the now-deceased fellow agent had an interest. We could withdraw funds using only proprietary access codes. Anything can be hidden by burying the answer in so many unrelated and tangled facts and threads that it would take an army of forensic accountants too much time and effort to trace. Even the IRS backs down when the cost of an audit exceeds the expected recovery. The money I was spending had been earned, but it had passed through so many accounts in so many countries that it was essentially untraceable. I'd learned these techniques during my time in special operations, and I'd used them to secure my financial independence. The corporation needed to appear legitimate, which meant it needed a physical presence. Sandra and I began looking for affordable office space in small office parks around Youngstown. She found a suitable location, nothing fancy, just a small office in a forgettable building, and paid the deposit using the corporate card. I told her to call me when the office was ready, then flew back to Chicago to work on my regular business while managing the tasks in this plan remotely. She had everything set up in no time. During this period, I ordered business cards for Paradise Seas Unlimited and had them sent to Sandra's new office. When she called to confirm everything was in place, I gave her the real cruise line's reservation phone number. Yes, there was an actual cruise company whose route we were mimicking, along with the name of their cruise ship, the cruise package we were interested in, and the date it would arrive in Valparaiso. I asked her to find out the cost of joining that cruise at the Chilean port and to request that all their promotional materials about the package be sent to her office as soon as possible. This would give us authentic materials to work from, making our fake package even more convincing. When she told me the cost of booking an upper-deck cabin on the real cruise, I transferred the funds so she could pay the non-refundable deposit using the company card. This was a necessary expense. We needed genuine booking confirmations and materials to make our fake package look legitimate. Of course, Vanessa would never actually board that cruise ship. But if anyone checked, there would be a real reservation in her name, at least initially. After securing the cruise reservation, Sandra began researching flights from the Youngstown area that would arrive in Santiago, Chile, as close as possible to the cruise ship's departure time. She also gathered detailed information on how to get from the Santiago airport to the pier in Valparaiso, about a 2-hour journey by bus. Once she had the flight information, she called the Chilean bus company to find out exactly how long it would take to get from the airport terminal to the cruise ship dock and what times they operated. Sandra informed me that the last available flight option was leaving from Cleveland, connecting through Houston, and landing in Santiago the afternoon before the cruise departure. Buses from Santiago to Valparaiso ran every 4 hours from 6 a.m. to 6 p.m., so a 10 a.m. bus the next day was the best option. It would get Vanessa to the pier with time to spare before the supposed cruise departure. I instructed Sandra to book tickets from Cleveland to Santiago for this flight, and a 10 a.m. bus ticket the next day to the pier. She should ensure all tickets were non-transferable and non-refundable. I also asked her to request that the bus company send a voucher to avoid any problems with this step. Additionally, I had Sandra reserve a room for one night at a hotel near the Santiago airport, with taxi fare covered both ways. This would give Vanessa a place to stay between her evening arrival and the morning bus departure. I wanted everything to seem properly planned and professional. Then came the final touch. I asked Sandra to book a non-refundable, non-transferable return flight from Seattle, where the real cruise would end, back to Cleveland. Of course, this return flight would never be used. Vanessa would never make it to Seattle on any cruise ship. But it was a necessary part of the illusion, and it made the whole package look complete and legitimate. Next, we needed to create the prize package. Sandra and I worked together to design what looked like a legitimate promotional mailing from a fictional cruise line. We created a company name, Paradise Seas Unlimited, and designed a logo. We found a local print shop that could produce professional quality materials. Glossy brochures, fake letterhead, official-looking certificates, everything. The package would inform Vanessa that she'd won an all-expenses-paid 6-month cruise that would depart from Valparaiso, Chile. The itinerary promised stops at tropical islands, Antarctic viewing, and tourist hotspots from the South Pacific to the Arctic. The materials emphasized that this was a once-in-a-lifetime adventure valued at over $50,000. To make it believable, we researched actual cruise packages and borrowed heavily from their marketing language. We included testimonials from previous winners, photos from legitimate Chilean tourist materials, and detailed information about what to pack, how to prepare, and what to expect. The package also included practical information, instructions for obtaining a passport if she didn't have one, details about flight arrangements to Chile, and information about a prize coordinator who would help with all the logistics. That coordinator, of course, would be Sandra. We also included information that served my purposes. Advice on converting her assets to traveler's checks for safety while abroad, suggestions to arrange for pet care and bill payments during her extended absence, and recommendations to pause magazine subscriptions and other services. All of this was designed to get her to liquidate her accessible assets and sever her local ties before departure, making it easier for her to simply disappear without immediate alarm. But here's the key detail that would prevent her from backing out. The package stated that to claim this prize, she must have a valid passport. Since a passport takes time to obtain and represents a significant investment of effort and money on her part, she'd be psychologically committed to the trip long before the departure date. By the time she had that passport in hand, she'd already be imagining herself on that cruise, bragging to everyone in Youngstown about her upcoming adventure. We refined the package over several weeks, adding details and polishing the presentation. We included a VHS videotape that appeared to be promotional footage from the cruise line, though it was actually just stock footage of luxury cruises and Chilean scenery edited together. We added photos from the Chilean tourist office showing the beautiful port of Valparaiso, the ship terminal, and nearby attractions. The package included everything she'd need to know: car rental arrangements and pet care options while she was at sea, tips on how to convert money into traveler's checks, advice on stopping newspaper delivery, everything. We refined and honed it right up until the publication deadline. Sandra found a startup advertising and printing company that could produce the professional quality we needed for $1,500 in less than 30 days. 120 days before the scheduled departure date, we delivered the prize package to a fulfillment house to ensure the finished product would reach Sandra, acting as the intermediary, exactly 90 days before departure. I also paid the remaining amount for what Vanessa believed would be her cruise passage from my hidden account. The bait was indeed appetizing for my ex-wife, who had never been more than a few miles from her hometown. The VHS tape and various photographs previewed her supposed luxury trip to an earthly paradise, an adventure that would give her significant bragging rights back in Youngstown. This was designed to make her think that when she returned home, it would take her years to tell all her stories. If everything went according to plan, she would indeed have many stories to tell. Disturbing stories about life at sea that would make strong men crumble and women faint. When it was done, the published prize package looked very professional and had all the glossy visuals and printed information we wanted. We both checked it thoroughly and approved it. Sandra had it ready in a FedEx box with a priority same-day delivery label and set it on her desk to await shipment 90 days before departure. I spent a pleasant day with Sandra before I left, including an evening of dinner and dancing and a night of what could only be described as mutually enjoyable company. On my flight home the next morning, I reflected on what I could write in her recommendation letter when this was all over. I'd focus on her efficiency, business acumen, and entrepreneurial spirit. Her 2.5 GPA significantly underestimated her true value in business, and her other talents were none of anyone else's concern. When the calendar counted down to the departure date, Sandra took the package to the FedEx office and had it delivered to Vanessa by courier, exactly on schedule. Everything was in motion now. The trap was set. All that remained was to see if Vanessa would take the bait. 3 days later, Vanessa took the bait. She arranged to meet Sandra at the office to formally accept her prize. Sandra explained over the phone that since the prize required overseas travel, a passport was necessary. Since a passport is valid for 10 years, Vanessa had to pay for it in cash. When Vanessa arrived at the small office, Sandra explained the entire process: flight schedules, hotel arrangements, bus connections, and passenger dock timing. Using her phone on speaker while Vanessa listened, Sandra called the cruise line, the airline, and the bus company in Chile. All of them confirmed that Vanessa had reservations in her name for round-trip flights, a bus to the cruise ship, and a return flight after the cruise ended. Sandra then helped Vanessa fill out her passport application form and emphasized that the process of obtaining a passport might take a couple of months. Without a passport, there would be no prize. Sandra added the bank receipt to the envelope, and Vanessa gave her the money to cover it. Cash she'd probably stolen from Sam. Vanessa had to go to a nearby building to take 2 passport photos for her application. When she returned with the photos, they sent the application and photos from the rental company's post office down the hall. Sandra reviewed the rest of the package and gathered the necessary information from Vanessa about her rent, car payments, and 2 pets. While Vanessa listened, Sandra made calls arranging matters with the landlord, the car rental company, and the chosen pet boarding facility. Everything was being set up so perfectly that Vanessa couldn't help but believe it was all real. Vanessa agreed to make any other necessary arrangements and be ready to depart 3 hours before flight time with her passport in hand. She would be picked up at her home and given tickets and updates before entering the airport. With her glowing references from me, Sandra spent most of the next 90 days job hunting and interviewing. She finally got a good position some distance up the west coast from my home in the Chicago area. Everything was falling into place. At the last minute, I decided I needed to make sure there weren't any last-minute glitches, and to get some closure for myself. I needed to be there to watch Vanessa walk into her destiny. I caught the flight to Santiago one day before my ex was scheduled to arrive and took a memorable bus journey from Santiago to Valparaiso. I practiced my basic Spanish with locals on the roof where cages with chickens and piglets were stored, and in the passage where they cooked dinner on small grills using dried llama dung as fuel. I doubt it's the same now, but it was quite an experience back then. When I settled into my hotel that evening, I called Sandra on her home phone. "Sandy, once Vanessa is in the air, you can start closing the office. Just don't close the bank account until all refunds have been received, bills paid, and services terminated." On the day of Vanessa's flight, Sandra picked her up and handed her all the tickets, along with an emergency envelope. Sandra explained that if something went horribly wrong, Vanessa should open the envelope immediately and follow the instructions. Of course, those instructions would lead her nowhere useful. Sandra escorted her to the gate area, sat with her until she boarded the flight, and then watched the plane take off. Once the plane was out of sight, Sandra called me to let me know it had all started. She then returned to the office to pack her personal belongings. While Vanessa was on her connecting flight to Santiago, Sandra called me again. I instructed her to cancel Vanessa's return flight from Seattle. I also called to cancel the real cruise reservation. Cost me the deposit, but the main amount was returned to my numbered account. With all business matters settled and the office empty, Sandra allowed the leasing agent to tour the space and confirmed that she would officially vacate it on Friday. The corporation would eventually be lost in bureaucratic delays and officially shut down by the state when the required annual documentation was not filed. No tax returns would be filed because the corporation had made no money. It was a ghost company vanishing into thin air. When I last checked with the airport the previous day, Vanessa's flight had landed in Santiago that morning. I confirmed with the bus company that she was now on a bus to the pier, with several stops to tour wineries along the way. Both the cruise ship and the cargo ship were scheduled to depart at evening tide, leaving her less than 4 hours for any final preparations. Precious little time. I spent the day of departure on the deck of a bar just off the freighter pier, sipping a local concoction called Piscola and watching the old, rusty cargo vessel being loaded with copper ore. When my ex arrived at the foot of the freighter ramp and saw the rusty old barge creaking in its moorings, I expected her to immediately start trying to find a way home by any other means. But after a long look at the dirty old boat, she walked up the gangway like she owned the place, only to have a dirty sailor grab her by the collar of her designer blouse and the seat of her designer pants and march her right back down to the dock. All the way down the ramp, she continued to point at her passport and shout the name of the cruise ship printed on her documents, as if volume alone could serve as a universal language translator. The sailor might not have understood English, but he clearly didn't care about her protests or her manners. Promised to be interesting and was worth the long journey here. I put my feet up on a table and ordered another drink. As soon as the sailor disappeared back onto the ship, she ran to the port office. I'd bet she was trying to make those hopeful calls back home on the airline's dime. When that didn't work, she would likely try to contact the U.S. Embassy or consulate. But the U.S. position would be that the Chileans should handle it. They'd finally let her in for questioning, but the Chilean officials would tell her they couldn't authorize her stay because she already had an emergency passage home arranged. This knowledge was thanks to an advance call I'd made. If she didn't take advantage of the freighter passage, the Chileans weren't likely to be happy, and she could be stuck in a Chilean detention facility for up to a year before being deported. As agreed, it was her choice. About 45 minutes later, she returned, frowning, and sat down on a bench near the dock. She was trapped. No money, no way home, and no one who could help her. About 15 minutes after that, the captain approached the side of the ship. When he recognized her from the photo I'd sent him, he walked down the ramp to get a better look. They talked for a few minutes before he disappeared back up the ramp with her passport and what little cash she had left. Having always been quick on her feet, she now found herself completely out of her element and thousands of miles from home. She had no more money, no one to call, and no choice. She realized she was trapped, lost in a world of her own design. She might have guessed that I had something to do with her problems, but she couldn't be sure and didn't have time to think about it. A few minutes later, the same sailor who'd been loading cargo approached me at the bar. The captain had sent her papers for me to see and sign. I noticed the official's name, signed with my other hand, and handed over the first annual payment in cash. After counting the money and signing my receipt, the sailor returned to the ship. 2 hours later, when the cranes and conveyors on the dock had finished loading and moved away, the captain returned to the side of the ship. Vanessa began to carry her luggage on board. When she had moved all her things, he made her stand outside the bridge while he gave orders to the crew to prepare to go to sea. The tugboats pulled and pushed the ship away from the pier and turned it toward the harbor exit. They passed through the breakwater and headed out to the open sea. She probably enjoyed that part anyway, the adventure she'd been promised, at least for a moment. I watched the ship slowly recede into the horizon before returning to the hotel to get ready to go home. Right before I checked out to catch the bus for my return flight, I called Sandra. Sandra, cancel Vanessa's rent, car payments, and pet care payments immediately. Vanessa had left me with a dead dog, an empty house, a ruined life, and only memories of misery and confusion. It was only fair that now she would be left without money, soon to be evicted in absentia. Her car would be repossessed, and her belongings thrown into the street. Her pets would be gone forever, and she would only be left with many difficult memories of her own. I called Sandra again on Friday and learned that she had closed the bank account. She didn't know what to do with the approximately $114,000 that was still in the account after paying bills and issuing refunds. Sandra, keep this money as a bonus and good luck to you in your new place and job. A few months later, Christine called me to tell me that she had given birth to a girl. She named her Desiree and listed Derek as the father on the birth certificate. She was already working to get more child support from him. If he couldn't shell out the money to challenge paternity, he'd have to pay to raise Christine's child for the next 18 years or more. 3 weeks after the cargo ship sailed from Valparaiso, Captain Rodriguez called me from Seattle to tell me that in a few hours, at low tide in the morning, they would be leaving for China with my ex on board. Everything was proceeding as we'd planned. I had my life back, as good as I could wish for in so many ways. Making money was no longer my priority. It was about living fully, and doing it before I was too old to enjoy it. My days were filled with new ideas about where to go, what to see and do, and then actually going and doing them 1 or 2 adventures at a time. The best part came when I met Isabella. I had loved Vanessa with all my heart, but my new love was much greater than the old one ever was or could be. Isabella Rossi filled all the holes and empty places in my heart that Vanessa had left. I love her name, Isabella, and every little detail about her. I respect her, and more importantly, I trust her. Isabella is wonderful with children and animals of all types and temperaments, and she has many friends. She's very popular at social gatherings but doesn't flirt and turns down the attention of other men gracefully. She can also display elegance, grace, and charm in formal society or charitable affairs. Every day is another surprise. She never ceases to amaze me. What a life I had found. I bought a house on the beach in the hills between Malibu and Santa Barbara. About a year later, We got married in Costa Mesa in a beautiful Latin American ceremony. I think about half of her extended family came to see us. We lived in the hills behind carefully guarded private beaches, but we had access to a couple of them thanks to some good neighbors who loved to share barbecues and swap recipes, but not spouses. After having 2 boys in 2.5 years, we decided to space our next children at least 3 years apart to give Isabella time to get back to her original shape between pregnancies. Since any future daughter would be protected by 2 older brothers, we both wanted a daughter next. I spoke to Captain Rodriguez on the first anniversary of my ex's departure to get some news and arrange for the annual payment to be transferred to his account. At the end of the 3rd year, he said that he was considering releasing her because she had proven useful to the operation. He mentioned that the arrangement was profitable enough that he'd be able to buy his own ship in a few years if things continued. I still called him once a year just to see how things were going. I even helped him with financing so he could complete the buyout of his ship. He continued to pay me back in large installments after every round trip from the Americas to the Far East and back. Eventually, Isabella managed to get the big secret about the overseas arrangement and the ship-to-shore phone calls out of me, and I finally told her the whole story from start to finish. I could tell she didn't approve, but she never said a word to me about it. However, her family began to treat me with even more respect. It seems that I was now perceived as a much more formidable man. Someone with money, power, and the heart to seek justice. Revenge seems to be of great importance to Latin families. Finally, at the end of the 7th year, Captain Rodriguez told me that my ex was no longer bringing in much money, and the crew was tired of her constant complaints. He was finally going to put her ashore in San Diego, along with a cargo of Christmas toys from Taiwan, in 2 weeks. I found myself alone in the shadow of a warehouse at the San Diego Marina where the captain said he would dock. When the ship was secured and the ladder was lowered, my ex came down from the vessel. The ship itself had a new coat of paint. My investment had clearly helped the captain's business. But my ex looked terrible, to say the least. As she passed by, I stepped out of the shadows. "Hey, sailor, can I buy you a drink?" It was definitely a cliché line, but why not use something classic? She stopped and looked at me. There was no life in her eyes. Took her a full minute to react. "Marcus? What are you doing here?" "I was waiting for you. Did you know I'd be here?" She stared at me, comprehension slowly dawning. "Wait. You set this all up, didn't you? Vanessa, you hurt everyone you've ever met, and any one of them could have orchestrated this. They were also angry enough at you that they could have formed a committee and collected donations to make it happen. But does that matter now?" "No," she said quietly. "Probably not." We talked for a while in the pub at the end of the pier. I received my personal satisfaction when I showed her photo albums I'd brought with me. Pictures of my beautiful wife and growing family, our palatial home with a huge veranda overlooking our private beach in Hawaii, the outdoor shower in the garden, our 90-foot yacht, and our villa on the seacoast of southwestern Tuscany for when it got too hot in Hawaii. I showed her everything she'd lost and everything I'd gained. When I was done, I said goodbye to her for the last time. I know she never returned home or contacted her family after that. As it turns out, I did care about what she'd done to me, and her betrayal did matter. But I'd found my own form of justice, and more importantly, I'd found a life worth living. A life infinitely better than anything I could have had with her. The trap had worked perfectly. The mission was accomplished. Thank you for your viewing. See you next time. If you enjoyed this, subscribe to JK Tells a Story for more tales.